A very good morning to everyone. The title of our study is Prevalence and Sociodemographic Factors Associated with Stunting Among Children in Terengganu, a secondary data analysis. Stunting is defined as height for age value less than -2 standard deviation. In 2020, WHO reported that globally stunting affected approximately 22% of children under 5 years of age, and in Malaysia, based on the 2019 NHMS report, 21.8% of children below 5 years suffered from stunting. Globally, the trend of stunting has been declining steadily. However, in Malaysia, it has been increasing. Therefore, it is important to study the socio-demographic risk factors that are associated with stunting among children in Terengganu so that proper interventions could be developed to tackle the issue. That brings us to the research question. The first question is, what is the prevalence of stunting in Terengganu? And secondly, what are the socio-demographic factors associated with stunting? The hypothesis of this study is that there is a significant association between socio-demographic factors and stunting in children. The general objective of this study is to study the prevalence and socio-demographic factors associated with stunting among children in Terengganu. There are three specific objectives of this study. Firstly is to determine the prevalence of stunting among children below 2 years in Terengganu. Second is to compare the socio-demographic factors between children who are stunted and normal. And third is to identify the predicting mother's socio-demographic factors for stunting among children below 2 years.
Next is the methodology of this study. The research design of this study is a cross-sectional secondary data analysis from the NHMS 2016 conducted by MOH in Terengganu. The research population was mothers aged 15 to 49 years with last childbirth less than 2 years prior, with their children below 2 years living in selected living quarters in Terengganu. Children or mothers with disabilities or chronic diseases were excluded from this study. The sampling frame was obtained from birth registrations provided by National Registration Department. Based on the frame, every state was divided into districts which contained the addresses of the children. The sampling method used for the NHMS survey was stratified random sampling to ensure national representativeness. The primary stratum is all states and federal territories in Malaysia, and the secondary stratum is districts within the primary stratum. The sampling unit is living quarters based on the information from the birth registration, where eligible living quarters were randomly selected proportionately within 8 districts in Terengganu. Data collection of the NHMS study was from February 2016 to May 2016. The data collected was maternal and child development assessment using structured questionnaire on Sociodemographic and the childhood developmental assessment to obtain children's weight, height and height for age, measured using the baby scale and stadiometer. The sample size calculated was 664 using the Daniel W formula. Data was analysed using SPSS version 28. Descriptive statistics were performed to determine the prevalence of stunting among children in Terengganu. Next, chi-square test was done to compare the socio-demographic factors between children who are stunted and normal, and binary logistic regression was done to determine the predicting socio-demographic factors of the mothers to stunting among children.
Continuing with results and discussion.
Objective 1 is to identify the prevalence of stunting among children under 2 years old. The oral stunting prevalence among children under 2 years in Terengganu was 21.6%, and it is higher than the NHMS 2015, which reported at 17.7%. This indicates that there was no improvement compared with previous year. It also did not achieve the target set by MPAN3, which the stunting prevalence among children under 5 years should not more than 11% by the year of 2025. Moving on to socio-demographic factors, there were 308 of the children are boys and 280 are girls. Most of them were between 12 and 24 months old. Majority of the children are Malay, and more than half of the children are staying in urban areas. Many parents were in the age of 31 to 49 years old. Almost both of the parents were educated, but fathers were more likely to be employed than mothers. Most of the children had lower family income, followed by moderate and higher income.
Objective 2 is to compare the socio-demographic factors between children who are stunted and normal. So based on our study, district versus stunting, there is a statistically significant association between the district and stunting. Research done in Terengganu in fishing village shows that there is a low median score of food groups in vegetables, fruits and dairy demonstrate a lack of adherence to nutritional recommendation by the fishermen children. Based on an article, height for age Z-score is positively associated with better mother's education, safe water and sanitation service, and better household economic status in urban area. Thus, we can conclude that the lowest prevalence of stunting in Kuala Terengganu may be due to factors stated by Smith, since the district is in an urban area, while the highest prevalence of stunting district in Dungun may be due to that it is a rural area as stated by Chua. However, in this study, the chi-square test shows no association between the factors except for district and stunting, which was the same as a research done in Indonesia. Although they have shown that household income and strata have correlation with stunting in children, this study shows no correlation. The same goes for gender. Fisher exact test shows no association between the factors that violated chi-square test, which is ethnicity, father's and mother's education level, and father's occupational status to stunting. This is also the same for the ethnicity.
Next, we use binary logistic regression to predict the probability of stunting among children based on the sociodemographic factors of the mothers. The output revealed that none of the predictors significantly influence the probability of stunting. The findings from this study does not correlate with the literature that concluded that strata and mother's employment status were significantly associated with the stunting problem. Those who live in a rural area and who works were more likely to have stunted children compared to those living in the urban areas and those who are unemployed. In addition, Mansoor, Afias and Hussein stated that the children from the poorest household were more likely to be stunted compared to those from richer households, while Baharuddin et al. Added that children were more likely to be stunted if their mothers only had secondary education. Moving on, the strength of this study is that stratified random sampling was used. This type of sampling method reduced the error in estimation and increased the precision when compared to simple random sampling. Also, the NHMS growth assessment used the WHO growth standards for data collection, allowing the findings to be comparable to international data. No study is without a limitation. The main limitation of this study was the inability to study the nutrient intake of children, which may be the main contributing factors to stunting. According to Wong et al., poverty status was not a good indicator for poor dietary intake among children due to the differences of household allocation of resources. Hence, taking into account of their nutritional intake would be beneficial. As a conclusion, the prevalence of stunting in Terengganu is 21.6%, which indicates a serious problem and urgent action is needed. District was the only factor that was associated with stunting in Terengganu. Further studies should look into specific district to determine the factors that affect stunting. Here's a list of references that we use, and thanks for listening.